The BRICS Development Bank was established at a cost of $100 billion and has been running for several months now and is based in Shanghai, China. BRICS is made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa and is an economic alliance. The African part of the bank is going to be based in Midrand here in Gauteng, and it's aimed at providing development capital to African nations. Already, South Africa has borrowed $180 million for energy purposes. But is the economic alliance still viable given the economic challenges faced by some of the member countries? The South African Vice President of the BRICS Development Bank is Leslie Maasdorp, and a pleasure to catch up with you once again, Leslie.
Thanks for having me.
Now, the preparations of establishing the bank have gone well. Everything up and running in China?
So the bank is now exactly 1 year old. Difficult to, time really flies, Tim. It was started 21st of July. We opened our office 21st of July 2015, so it's precisely 1 year. And the bank is really fully operational now. I'd say there were three main achievements over the last year. The first one is that we achieved a AAA credit rating in the domestic Chinese market. So why is that important? It's important because when you have a credit rating that's so favorable, it reduces your cost of borrowing, right? And you're then able to price your loans very competitively or lower than, let's say, what people would obtain from other commercial institutions. That's the first major achievement. The second major achievement is that the bank was able to announce projects worth just over $911 million, so just under $1 billion of projects we've completed. And that was done within record time. I mean, it typically takes somewhere between 18 months and sometimes even up to 2 years for a large infrastructure loan to be approved. So the bank has been able to really fast track its processes to ensure that its operations are run more smoothly, and we can talk a little bit more about how that specifically was done. And then the third important achievement over the last year is that we managed to issue our first bond. We issued a green bond in the Chinese market, and we raised 3 billion renminbi about 2 weeks ago, to be exact.
Now, just the nature of the bank, it's not a straightforward commercial bank, right? We say $100 billion that was put together to create it. It's a politically created bank, this, out of the economic alliance of BRICS. So member countries had to make donations, or rather contributions, to create the bank.
Yeah.
And the major contributor to the makeup of the bank is China.
No, so this bank is very unique in the sense that it has no controlling shareholder. So each of the 5 countries have an equal say in the running of the institution. So let me talk about the capital structure first. So the authorized capital is $100 billion. The subscribed capital is $50 billion. And what's called paid-in capital is $10 billion. So that $10 billion is made up with contributions of $2 billion each from each of the 5 countries. And it's paid in installments every year. The first installment is $150 million. The next installment now is $250 million, about 3.5 billion rand, to put it in South African rand terms. And so the installments go up. So the amounts are not made in one full deposit, if you like.
Yes.
It's paid in installments. Callable capital, so 10 billion is paid in, 40 billion is callable. What that means is that the bank has access to that capital if it needs to. But the main funding of an institution like a development bank is through the capital markets. So what we do is we invest our paid-in capital very conservatively in AA or AAA rated instruments, and then we raise money in the debt capital markets by issuing bonds, either domestically, for example, in China, or we might issue a bond in South Africa, and also in hard currency, in US dollars or in euro. So that has now started. That's when a bank is really a bank, when it's able to go to the capital markets and raise its own money.
That's
because investors feel secure by the credit rating of the bank that the risk of default is very, very low.
But of course, there are political considerations in the establishment of the bank. Even then, a year ago, the talk and the thinking was that the bank is being established to replace the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund. What's the difference between the bank, the BRICS Bank, and those two institutions?
So the World Bank and all the other multilateral banks firstly were established a long time ago, 1944 in the case of the World Bank, Asia Development Bank in the 1950s, Africa Development Bank in the 1960s. So these are very old institutions. The New Development Bank is a very, very young baby, if you want to call it that, right? So comparison is really an unfair comparison. However, in aspiration, it is indeed true that the founders, the large emerging markets, China, India, and so on, were very unhappy with the nature of the control structures of the World Bank. So over the last 70 years, as you know, the world has been dominated by the US, Western Europe, and these very large industrialized countries. And over the last 30 years, large emerging markets like China, India have grown in size, in economic size, in political stature, and so on. And their voting was not reflected, their growth in size and stature was not reflected in the actual voting power in these institutions. So there has been a unhappiness, a disgruntlement from these institutions wanting to have a greater voice. So that is part of the historic backdrop of why the bank was formed. However, we are not a rival institution at all. I mean, we in fact have memoranda of understanding with all of these leading banks. We work together very closely with them. I speak, probably I'd say every other week to one of these institutions, checking things with them, drawing lessons from how they're doing things. So we're very much collaborative institutions.
And you say you have equal say as the member countries, right? The 5 member
That
countries.
is correct.
South
That is
Africa
correct.
enjoys the same status as China, as Russia,
Exactly.
as India.
Exactly.
Now, this past year in December, the Minister of Finance was dismissed by the president, and the president subsequently said that the minister was going to be appointed to the bank. Is the position for Minister Nene still open? And what is the story there, actually?
Okay. So firstly, the New Development Bank is headquartered in China, right? It has its own management structure. It has a board of directors. It has a board of governors, which comprise of the 5 ministers of finance, right? The founders of the bank decided way back in 2012, 2013, that the first office, after the head office has been established, will be in Africa and will be in South Africa, right? So the aim has always been to establish a regional office in South Africa. So as I mentioned earlier on, when the president and the 4 vice presidents were appointed, the presidents from India, Mr. K.V. Kamath, and 4 vice presidents from the other BRICS countries, their task, their responsibility was to establish the head office of the bank. The regional office will work in a complementary fashion with the head office to identify projects, to look at a project pipeline in Africa. In December, at that stage, we just started the process of beginning the advertisements for the senior roles within the bank below the roles of vice president. One of these roles was the head of the Africa Regional Center. So indeed, the South African government formally nominated Minister Nene for that role. We are still in the process of filling that role now. In fact, the role has been re-advertised because we want to try and broaden and deepen the pool of talent who want to apply for that role. It's a very senior role. It's called Director General of the Africa Regional Center, and that person will lead the activities of the bank in Africa.
Coming back to the African leg of the bank, the regional bank, and the one that's going to be, is it up and running, and what progress have you made in that regard in terms of the infrastructure and the resourcing of the bank?
So naturally, because we only started opening off our doors in July in Shanghai last year, our focus and absolute priority was on building the head office, right? That entailed, firstly, drafting all the necessary policies, operation policies, financial policies, procurement policies, and so on. Secondly, as I said, we begin to put in place all of the systems to be able to prepare for our first capital raising to issue our first bond, right? We started hiring staff and so on. So we, in sequence, I mean, although the intention was to establish the regional office at the same time as head office, it was just not practically possible to do that. I'd say in Shanghai now, we have all the enabling conditions to be called and systems to be called a bank. In South Africa, for the regional office, we have now, as I said, begun the process to appoint the head. We have identified staff who will be seconded to the bank, but the office have not been formally opened. It's literally a matter of weeks before the plans will be announced. I mean, I can't go into the detail now because it's still in motion, if you like.
In fact, I want to talk about the other bigger questions and challenges facing the bank, because the member countries who are funding the bank are themselves in trouble, and where you are placed, you can give us an overview of the world's economy. What is going on in the world at the moment? I mean, the South African growth was revised downwards to 0.1%. Probably we must live with no growth whatsoever. It might even be negative in time. But countries such as Brazil are in trouble. Russia is in trouble. Serious slowdown in China. Just give me the broad overview of the world's economic performance at the moment.
I think the first point to make is that when the bank was formed, right, there's no question, or when the idea of the bank was born, emerging markets was definitely the sort of darlings, if you like, of the world, right? That context have changed. As you know, commodity prices have come down significantly. The Chinese economy has slowed down to a 25-year low. China's still growing at 6.5%, but the important number to remember is that the last time China grew 6.5% was in 1991. So that's 25 years ago. But it's still 6.5% growth, right? Brazil is in a deep political and economic crisis. With regards to the economy, they're in a deep recession of minus 3.5%. South Africa growth has significantly slowed down, but we are still broadly in positive territory. The Russian economy is facing serious challenges, as you've just mentioned, both because of oil and gas prices having taken a significant nosedive, but also because of the impact of sanctions. The outstanding performer out there is obviously India, growing at 7.5%. In fact, it was adjusted upwards recently. So India is kind of the outlier, if you like. Because China is slowing down, and China is the lead trading partner of Brazil, of South Africa, that also impacts on the economic growth prospects there. The important point, though, is that when the bank was formed, it was formed with very long-term horizons, right? So the short-term cyclical variables around commodity prices and slowdown of growth, these are dynamics of 2, 3, maybe 4 years. But the bank was started with kind of 20, 30-year sort of horizons. So that's the first major sort of point of departure for us, right? I think we look very closely at the underlying economic drivers of each of these economies and believe that all of them, Brazil, South Africa, that at some point commodity prices will turn. The fundamental drivers of growth, whether it's development of new infrastructure, whether it's urbanization, all of those drivers remain there. It's just a question of when the economic cycle will turn. So it's not all doom and gloom term. That's really what I'm suggesting.
I want to come back to the African leg of the new development bank. That what is it going to be looking at? And it does not exist for the benefit of South Africa alone. And the point has been made, right? You will be looking at opportunities and projects from the continent. So specifically, where do you see the opportunities and which areas is the bank going to participate in?
I think the first point to make is that the new development bank has 5 member countries, and we will only invest for now in those 5 member countries. However, the bank has a very clear indication in its articles of agreement that at some point it will expand its membership, right? So the first aspect about the bank is that it will always be an emerging markets institution, because the articles makes provision that the 5 member countries who now have 100% of the bank will dilute to 55% at some point. And then another 25% will be set aside for other emerging market countries. So Nigeria, Kenya, Angola, these countries can apply for membership. And then another 20% of the bank will be set aside for advanced industrialized countries, right? So at some point within the future, other countries will be able to apply for membership once the terms and conditions have been defined. So the Africa Regional Center was designed to be part of that new phase of the bank when new members will be allowed in. In the short term now, though, the projects for South Africa is focused on firstly South Africa, and then projects of a regional character. For example, we would probably be looking at projects like the expansion of the transmission network of Eskom to export power, because at some point in the future we will probably have surplus power, right? Or we could look at projects like the Lesotho Highlands, where they are working on a second phase of that project, which is really located in Lesotho, but the provision of water is to South Africa. So the economic beneficiary is South Africa. So there's a strong intention to look at projects that have a regional dimension, where other African countries in the region could also be beneficiaries of this infrastructure development process.
Well, New Development Bank is work in progress and going to be established in South Africa, and there's so much work ahead of you, Mr. Maasdorp.
Thank you very much.
But thanks again for sitting down with us and updating us on the work that's been done by the bank. Much appreciated. And there you are, the New Development Bank, and colloquially called the BRICS Bank, is celebrating its first anniversary. It was established July last year, and we're catching an update with the Vice President of the bank, Leslie Maasdorp, and you've heard for yourself. What do you think, anyway, of BRICS? Do you think it's going to work, given the challenges faced by some of the member countries? We'd like to hear from you, and you can write to us. The address is tonightwiththimmodise@gmail.com, and comment as well via Twitter @Tim Modise. Would like to hear your opinions regarding the BRICS Bank.